Right, we got to make this quick. Keeping you apprised of humanity's demise one glorious final day at a time. Now, my friends, we need to talk a lot about World War III. More attacks in Moscow today, more attacks in the Black Sea, more attacks in Syria. We have a massive agglomeration of vehicles in Warsaw, Poland right now under the guise of a military parade. We'll talk a little bit about that. Chinese crops have been wiped out, and that's going to lead to yet another all-time high in the price of rice. Oil demand is hitting record new highs. The capital of Canada has been flooded. We got all kinds of heat waves inbound. But before we talk about that, I must address this one simple thing, because I've been warning people about this since 2016 when the fires started to really get crazy here in Canada. There is one simple thing you can invest in. It's very low cost, and unfortunately, it could have saved a lot of lives that we've seen in this fire in Hawaii, for which people had very little warning. Part of the reason why they had very little warning is because the winds were so strong. These were hurricane winds, basically, and it was very dry conditions. You just had the right set of conditions, very dry, and that wind acted like a bellows, like a blast furnace, and everything just incinerated almost instantaneously. And unfortunately, a lot of people who were trying to flee these fires likely died of smoke inhalation or carbon monoxide poisoning. And there was a very simple thing that each one of them should have had. And it's a very low-cost investment. It's a fire mask, okay? I've talked about this on the channel on numerous occasions. You can get this through the link in the description. It's low cost. This will not only protect you against the smoke, it will also protect you against carbon monoxide. If you find yourself in a confined space, low oxygen environment, this is going to see you through. A lot of people like the ones you're seeing behind me here, some of them have been found and rescued, thank God, but many are gone missing. They're saying that over 1,000 people may likely have fallen victim, casualty to this, what will be one of the worst disasters in U.S. history, okay? So a simple thing like this, a fire mask that protects against carbon monoxide. Now, if you're already a prepper and you have your Nato gas mask with a 40 millimeter thread, you can, of course, use your P3 HEPA filter, which will protect you from the smoke particles. It won't protect you against carbon monoxide. However, for that, you're going to need a carbon monoxide filter. Everybody who lives in a wooded region, even if it's not drought prone right now, we've seen how quickly a place can go from no drought to abnormally dry to extreme amounts of drought in just the span of a couple years. So it doesn't take long for you to become a high risk. If you live around trees, I think Hawaii is proof that you need to have an escape plan, especially if there's a lot of bottleneck corridors. If you live in British Columbia, in the mountains where there's not a lot of roads, everybody needs something like this. This is a carbon monoxide filter. Again, I'll post a link in the description below. We had our supply cut off of these when the war started because Russia was the only country manufacturing them. Now manufacturing has been moved to another country so we can get these once again. I would encourage you, if you have a gas mask, pick one of these up. I believe the expiration date is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 8 years. But with most things, whether we've demonstrated with the shelf life extension program with the U.S. military for medications or for the shelf life of food, a lot of these things are just recommendations. The thing is going to last a lot longer than that. I wouldn't be surprised if this lasts for decades, okay? So pick one of those up and just practice fire safety in general. I mean, fire is one of those things as a prepper. If you don't have a fire extinguisher and you have 5 years worth of food, your priorities aren't straight. So this is why I do videos on fire preparedness so frequently, because it is just so important. Now imagine a situation in a grid down situation where there was no emergency services, not that they could have done much in this situation, but imagine the fires of SHTF, how intense and frequent those are going to be. There's going to be just fires like crazy. So you have to prepare when there is no, water to suppress the fire, no sprinkler systems that are operational, you're going to see a lot of fires. So you absolutely have to have that. Now, we need to also talk about other things that are going on in the world. There's plenty of natural disasters occurring right now, but of course, the man-made sort are the ones that are most intriguing to people on this channel. This is another massive warehouse fire in Moscow. It appears to be probably another warehouse that's adjacent to the military-industrial complex in some way, shape, or form. This is well above the statistical baseline. This sort of thing is not supposed to happen with this frequency. Yes, Russia is a country of 150 million people, and there's always going to be fires, but this is just reaching levels that are well above the statistical baseline. We have acts of sabotage, arson, frequent drone attacks on a daily basis. Usually they are brought down by the drone guns that the Russian police are walking around Moscow with right now, but occasionally they do make it through. And for every attack and act of sabotage that we see, the likelihood of Russia having to ultimately engage with NATO directly increases markedly. So I do believe that if this is the new normal, that we're going to start seeing more and more buildings, more and more drone attacks on Moscow, it is only a matter of time before the fight actually happens before we see the initial engagement between the Russians and the Americans or NATO forces. It's only a matter of time. Now, arguably, we already seen that with the drone interaction over the Black Sea last year, but I'm talking about an actual attack, actual hybrid warfare in the other direction. Which brings me to the next story, and that is this. Poland is amassing force under the guise of a military parade. Hundreds of military vehicles line the streets of what I'm presuming would be Warsaw, getting ready, rehearsing for a military parade. Now, when we first talked about this last week, when I told you that this was going to happen, I didn't think much of it. I figured this was just a way for Poland to flex the whole appear strong when you're actually weak type strategy, of the art of war. But the more that I think about it, could this very well be an opportunity for Poland to agglomerate and mobilize a large amount of troops, almost like an exercise, like a military drill? These parades really are, in some ways, military exercises because it's a logistical ballet, and you're really seeing what does it take to move large amounts of troops and mechanized brigades of troops, in very tight corridors in a very short period of time. So I'm not saying that this is Poland putting its military on a heightened state of alert as a result of what is going on the Belarusian border, but yes, I am actually saying that. It appears as though every other day Poland is ramping up the troop deployments to the border, be it in the Suwalki corridor in the northern direction and in the Brest direction in the southwestern part of Belarus, where Belarus meets Poland. So it almost looks as though, and you have to wonder, it almost looks like NATO is getting ready to invade Belarus, is what it appears. And maybe this is why, and Putin anticipated that by placing tactical nuclear weapons there and sending the Wagner group in. But you have to ask yourself, really, what was I going to say? I totally forgot what I was going to say. Jesus. Man, that's embarrassing when that happens. You have to ask yourself, what was I going to say? You have to ask yourself, if Poland is displaying all of this military equipment while Ukraine is struggling and suffering on the front lines, you have to ask yourself what they are thinking. What is Ukraine thinking when they see all of this military equipment, a lot of it from the United States, just being paraded while they are there in the trenches, desperately needing more manpower and material? You have to wonder exactly what they're thinking. Now, some people will say, well, we've given billions and billions. But for Poland to do something like this right now, it seems inappropriate in every possible way, at a time when you are supposed to be supporting a country who is eventually going to be a member of NATO. You would think that the resources that they are utilizing here, even just the gas to conduct this military parade, you think that would be better served in Ukraine. Now, this is not to say that Poland isn't one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine in terms of the amount of refugees they've taken in, the amount of mercenaries or foreign fighters that they've sent in on Ukraine's behalf, and the amount of material that they've shipped and aid that they've sent. But still, I think this is either just an excuse to agglomerate force, to do a massive drill that simulates moving large amounts of manpower and equipment at the same time, a very large convoy of equipment, or it is potentially something more sinister. It's potentially a warning to the Ukrainians also that if you don't get the job done, then we're going to have to come in there and get it done for you. But I don't think the Russians are losing sleep over this largely untested military, which is not to say that a lot of those Polish mercenaries who've been involved in the fighting on the front line in Ukraine haven't reported back all of their key findings. Utilizing their expertise and experience will be incorporated into the Polish military, no doubt. So keep your eye on the military parade coming up on August 15th, and just keep your eye on the Belarusian border, because it appears as though that's becoming a very inflamed state of affairs. What else do we need to talk about? China right now is dealing with one of its worst floods in history. Now, interestingly, it seems that year after year, the chaos in China's climate is just getting absolutely worse every year, from droughts that we've seen last year, historic droughts around the world. That's all we heard about last year, drought. And that was La Nina. Now we're entering El Nino, where you're supposed to get droughts, okay? And we're seeing this insane flooding in certain parts of the world. Indeed, we're still seeing a lot of drought in numerous parts of the world. But what's of concern here is that this is going to affect the rice harvest. Now, China has been preparing for this by hoarding the majority of the world's staple grains. China holds something like 70% of all of the corn and grain that is currently being stored on Earth, and they only, of course, maybe comprise 20% of the global population. But the Chinese are getting ready for World War III and climate chaos, and this is going to put a big damper on rice production. Of course, the Indians have already cut off their exports of rice as a result of issues that they're having in their country with respect to drought. So we're seeing rice now at 15-year highs. We're approaching those 2008 levels that preceded the Arab Spring, because when you have foods, staple foods like this at record highs in the developing world, this creates chaos where they don't have a lot of disposable income. A greater proportion of their income is allocated for the main provisions of life, like food and health care and things of that nature. Primarily, of course, in this case, food. And that means that you're going to have more and more unrest in those countries, more and more immigration, etc., etc. So the price of rice is expected to continue to skyrocket. We also have some interesting scenes coming out of Morocco. The sky is literally blood red, and not for wildfires. Now, Morocco is no stranger to sandstorms, but they have been experiencing record temperatures like most of the planet this year. And this has created just this weird biblical-like scene. If you're a person who thumbs through the pages of Revelation, you have a lot of good material to accompany that reading this year. No doubt. Just but one of the many climate anomalies currently afflicting the planet. We have the Russians intercepting a commercial vessel in the Black Sea. As you can see, this Russian helicopter here intercepting this commercial vessel in the Black Sea that was destined for the Odessa ports. This is, I believe, one of the first since the suspension of the grain treaty, the grain deal. And of course, Ukraine has made threats that if the Russian continues to do this, that it's open season on Russia's Black Sea fleet, which is why we very likely have seen ramping up of attacks on the Crimean Bridge lately. Now, if you recall, just a couple days ago, oh, this is another attack in Moscow. Just a couple days ago, we advised people that, hey, there's this what is it called again? An RQ-4 Global Hawk, I believe. RQ-4B Global Hawk by Northrop Grumman reconnaissance plane flying in the Black Sea. Now, this is very common nowadays, ever since the start of the war. But there was a lull there for about a week's time. I go on Flight Radar daily, and I check to see if there's been any activity in this region, because typically, in recent months, if you see a reconnaissance plane here, it's because they're doing an important operation, and typically nowadays it precedes some sort of attack. We've seen that a couple days ago. There was this same reconnaissance drone flying around the Black Sea, and just a few hours after it had had its transponder off, there were already attacks being reported on the Kerch Bridge, all of which we are told have been deflected, although that's not entirely confirmed. Russia put up some smoke screens, and literal smoke screens, and they claim that they have basically shot down all the drones. But there's also, this is happening right now today, so this signals that there's probably going to be more attacks in the coming 24 hours. We also have a Boeing Poseidon reconnaissance plane, and that one appears to be focused more so on what was the grain corridor between Odessa and this Turkish Strait here, okay? So it's looking like we're going to see more attacks in the Black Sea if I was a betting man, and that means that the Russians are going to respond once again with more Kinzhal strikes. Allegedly, Kinzhal targeted 4 key locations in Ukraine, targeted Patriot missile defense systems. Once again, this is unconfirmed, but the Russians are claiming that they're knocking out these Patriot missile batteries left and right. Apparently, 3 of 5 have been destroyed, I do believe, but that's just, you can find any information to justify any perspective at this point in time. If you want to believe that the Ukrainians are winning, you can go and you can source thousands of data points that substantiate that. If you want to find the contrary, then you can do that. So really, all we can do right now is just kind of take in all of the information and make assumptions. It appears as though the Russians have stymied the counteroffensive of the Ukrainians. Boy, my brain is just not working today. This is as far as they've been able to get into Russia's defensive line. So Russia has lines and lines and lines of defense, and the Ukrainians have only made it in this far. And then what happens when you make it in this far? If you don't do some sort of blitzkrieg-like maneuver, then they'll just come back around and encircle you from these fortifications here. But, the Ukrainians insist that the counteroffensive hasn't even started yet, believe it or not, or that it's not going to plan, but it hasn't really started yet. Now, the Ukrainians did get a win here. They caught a major colonel who appears to be in a video giving up positions of his men. So this is a Russian major colonel, and this is totally in defiance of the Geneva Convention. I should add, this Russian major colonel is showing the locations of his Russian soldiers to the Ukrainians who have captured him. It looks like this is along the Dnieper River, I would presume. So the Russians aren't too happy about that. Again, he was interviewed here for, I believe it was about 15 minutes. You can never believe when a POW is being interviewed. They're obviously being coerced into saying certain things, and even if they don't have any bruises above the neck, you can believe that there's other methods of torture that could be exacted on a person. It could be threats to their family. It could be a variety of different things. It could be things that don't leave any marks whatsoever, okay? Sleep deprivation or all sorts of things. So it's very likely that, in fact, anybody, any POW is being tortured if they're at that high level. You have to just come to expect that. In the Arctic, Sergei Shoigu, Russian defense minister, visited the Arctic recently to check on the detachment of warships there. But some people are suggesting that they may, in fact, recommence doing nuclear testing at a place called Novaya Zemlya in the Arctic. That is up here, okay? This is Novaya Zemlya. This is where around 130 of Russia's nuclear weapons tests did occur. And according to some sources, Putin rattles the nuclear saber again. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visits Arctic island notorious for testing nukes. Now, it's also one of the deployments for their Arctic Navy. But, you know, some people are suggesting, as a response to what the chief of the Space Force there, Roscosmos, said last year, that maybe now that there are no treaties preventing us from doing nuclear testing, maybe we're going to start it up again. It's very likely if we were to see nuclear weapons utilized, they will first be utilized in a test before they are actually utilized in Ukraine. That will be the first run-up, the escalatory nuclear ladder. Okay, what else do we got to talk about today? Another drone attack in Moscow that was foiled. What else do we got? Okay, so let's go back to the map here, just on the topic of rice and grain stocks. So this is China's share of global grain stocks. Okay, this is what they have in their coffers right now. So in terms of corn, it's pretty much at a record high. This isn't 2023, so they've been stockpiling again this year, but it's pretty much at a record high. Some of these are starting to go down. The wheat is starting to go up once again, and soybeans also still at record high. So what is China preparing for? Well, they're obviously preparing for this ongoing climate chaos and these heat waves. Now, some people are citing El Nino and La Nina as being the primary drivers of what we are seeing right now. The problem with that is that in the last couple years, we've been a triple dip La Nina, okay? And during those years, it's never been drier, it's never been hotter, it's never been everything that you would expect to see in El Nino. So obviously there's a greater overall trend that is trending towards more warm, drought-like, extreme climatic conditions. I'm not going to have that debate with people, but I'm guessing if you've been familiar with this channel for some time, you know my thoughts on that. Oil prices poised to soar once again as global demand hits a record high. So global demand for oil and carbon-based, CO2-based fuels is not going anywhere. So, we could pretty much just, the best thing you can do is prepare for the consequences of increased energy use, conspicuous consumption, and this is part of the reason why it's called Jevons paradox. And it's this idea that even if we do get better efficiency in terms of the energy we use, we'll just use more energy. It's just a natural tendency of humans. So the cost of the energy, as the cost for energy goes down, the more of it we're going to use. So, even if you were to say, make vehicles more efficient, the idea is, well, if vehicles are more efficient, people would drive more because they would be able to go further on less. If, it becomes cheaper to, say, power the metaverse, then we'll build the metaverse twice as better as it was before, right? So, we're pretty much screwed is what I'm trying to say. What else we got to talk about here, guys? The drought is still ongoing in Canada. The thing going on in Niger continues. Russia is warning ECOWAS about the possible inflammation of that crisis. And it appears that Nigeria, there's some mixed opinions on it, but they claim to be, at least right now, ready to go into Niger and reinstate the government there. But of course, Niger says, well, if you do that, then we're just going to kill the president, the former president. The Russian ruble continues to crash, but also you want to take that one critically because you have to ask yourself, well, the Russian ruble may be plummeting, but what does a Russian ruble buy you in Russia? Okay, how much is a liter of gas in Russia? How much national debt does Russia have? How much is food in Russia? How much is housing in Russia? The truth is, it's proportionally a lot less than it is here in the West. And you gotta factor that into the equation. Okay, we got North Korea preparing for war with the South, yada, yada, yada. China has made a weapons breakthrough. Beijing's military science have claimed success in enabling high-energy lasers to operate indefinitely without overheating. So many of you have seen the laser weapon systems that you're using for anti-missile technology. I believe Raytheon is one of those companies working on that. Anyways, one of the limitations has been the duration that you can operate the laser without it overheating. So now apparently they've made a breakthrough. Now, probably not the best time to release this type of information because of all the conspiracy, blah, 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 around the fires in Hawaii. I'm not even going to comment on that. It's honestly kind of in poor taste, I think, because people are still being picked out of the rubble, and you already have people online, these super sleuths, who think they got it all figured out. I've talked to Green Gregs about this before. It's impossible right now for them to have a laser that maintains the focal length from space powerful enough that it's able to actually ignite a fire. And even then, you have to use your common sense. Why wouldn't they just light the fire on the ground? Okay, why wouldn't all it would take, if it was just a spark that was needed, they could have just, and obviously there would have been witnesses who would have seen late. Anyways, I don't even want to dignify that conversation. Guys, get yourself a fire mask, CanadianPreparedness.com. Please, if you live in a wooded region, this could save your family's life. Do it. Forget about it. Hope you never, ever have to use it again. Thanks for watching Canadian Pro.